Hello and welcome back to Detective and Mystery Fiction. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. This story is a detective noir tale with elements of hard-boiled fiction. It centers on a troubled photographer, Wayne, who uncovers a web of deception and murder while working on a routine assignment. As he navigates through corruption, betrayal, and personal loss, Wayne is forced to confront a dangerous adversary in a high-stakes game of survival. The narrative delves into themes of justice, vengeance, and the blurry line between right and wrong, exploring how one's past can shape their present decisions and the price of uncovering dark truths. Stop the Presses by Frederick C Davis. Black Mask, December 1938. An accused killer joins his own manhunt. The patrolman came out of the dark door, crossed the porch, and paused on the top step. In his right hand he was holding his service revolver. He lifted the gun and aimed with cool deliberation at the dark figure that was fleeing down Sycamore Drive. The man who had bolted from the house a moment ago was running through the shadows of a wet and blustering night. The rain shaking through the trees helped to make him an indistinct target. The patrolman waited with grim patience, his gun still lifted, while the fugitive moved toward the shine of the streetlight at the corner. The light was a hazard that the escaping man could not avoid. Suddenly, he became clearly visible, running with his shoulders hunched, his hat pulled low, a coat bundled under his left arm. He crossed the sidewalk with the obvious purpose of dodging into the darker side street. At that instant, the patrolman fired. The shot was a flash of coppery flame, a thunderbolt that caused the fugitive to stumble. He seemed about to fall, but he caught himself and dove into the shelter of a hedge. The patrolman sprang from the steps, watchful for any flicker of movement, his gun poised. He hastened to the intersection. His wet rubber coat glistened as he paused, peering in every direction through the downpour. His quarry was nowhere in sight. Quickly he turned about and hurried back to the house. The only light in the house was shafting up through the open door of the cellar. The patrolman gazed down the stairs and his ruddy face grew hard. His lips were thin, his chin blunt, and his eyes calculating. In a confidently decisive manner, he took up the telephone. The line was open. A voice was rasping over it when he tucked the receiver inside the flap of his rubber cap. "Hello, Orr," the voice was saying. "Patrolman Orr speaking again, Inspector. He made a break for it, sir, turned off the lights, ran out and got away. Better signal the radio bureau, sir." "Give me his description." "Age about 30, sir. Good-looking chap. 6 feet, brown hair, blue eyes, wearing a gray suit. He grabbed up a hat and some kind of a topcoat on the way out, but I didn't get a look at them. I fired at him, sir, and I'm sure I hit him." Patrolman Orr could hear Inspector Early talking to the radio bureau over the office dictograph. "It's on the air now," the inspector informed him briskly. "Go back to what you were telling me when he made the break." "Yes, sir." "I was working my tour about 10 minutes ago when I heard a couple of gunshots, muffled reports, like they'd come from inside one of the houses. I tried to locate the house, and the next thing I heard was a chopping sound in the Wayne place, number 5750 Sycamore Drive. I entered by the front door without knocking, and I walked right in on a murder." "You say Mrs. Wayne's body is in the cellar?" "Yes, sir. She's not wearing anything but a nightgown, so he must have shot her upstairs in the bedroom, then carried her down. I found Wayne, her husband, down there with her. There's a hole dug in the floor underneath the stairs. Looks like he was going to bury her, hide her body." "Stay right there until the homicide squad arrives," Inspector Early directed. "Then come to my office and make a full report." "Yes, sir." Patrolman Orr disconnected, turned to the cellar door, and descended into the cold cement room where the murdered woman lay. Rain swept by in angry gusts. It pelted the streaming windows, poured off swinging signs, and filled the gutters. Only a few cars and fewer pedestrians were braving the storm, but in the downtown section of the city, scores of rubber-coated cops were on the prowl. Orders direct from the chief's office had organized every available patrolman into a concerted manhunt. They tried the doors of stores that were closed for the night. They tramped through back alleys and dark yards. They peered into every doorway, their eyes alert for a fugitive wanted for murder. As one of them appeared at the corner directly ahead of him, Stephen Wayne lowered his head. Through the water dripping from the brim of his sodden hat, he gazed warily at the ominous black figure. His steps slowed. The cop was tramping toward him. He turned to the only possible shelter nearby, the door of a cheap restaurant. He went in quietly, concealing the anxious tension of his nerves, trying to appear to be a casual customer. The air in here was warm and heavy with the greasy odor of cooking. Two men were perched on stools at the white tile counter. Behind it, another man who had a soiled apron wrapped around his paunch was frying 2 hamburgers on the grill. Stephen Wayne opened his streaming coat and shook the water from his hat, using only his right hand while his left arm hung stiffly at his side. He slid onto another of the stools. "Coffee," he said. He saw the cop step into the doorway. The cop stood there, looking up and down the street. Watching him through the tails of his eyes, Wayne drank coffee. He drank slowly while the patrolman remained in the doorway. There was a midget radio sitting on a shelf. It had been playing, but now its music was fading. Wayne sat motionless, listening to an announcement. From the editorial room of the Queen City Chronicle comes another dispatch concerning the murder of Mrs. Stephen Wayne. The police are still searching for the husband of the dead woman. The railroad terminal, the airport, the bus stations are being watched. All cars leaving the city are being stopped. Chief of Police Beckett has just issued a statement saying that he believes Stephen Wayne, wanted for the killing of his wife, has not succeeded in escaping the city. Chief Beckett is confident that Wayne's apprehension is only a matter of hours, perhaps minutes. The weapon of murder has not been found. It is believed that Wayne is still carrying the gun with which he allegedly murdered his wife. All officers detailed to the case have been warned that Wayne is evidently desperate to escape justice, and that an attempt to capture him may mean a gunfight. Chief Beckett, who is known for his direct and drastic methods, has ordered his men, if it is necessary to shoot in order to capture Wayne, shoot first. The Queen City Chronicle will bring you more news concerning the Wayne murder as developments arise. Stephen Wayne's mouth tightened. His cup was empty now. He saw that the patrolman was still blocking the door. He slowly moved his left arm and suppressed a pained grimace. His high forehead was covered with cold dew. His nerves were jerking, and his stomach seemed about to capsize. Rising, he left a nickel on the counter and turned to the door in the rear that was labeled Men. After a few moments, he felt steadier. He sank the bolt into its socket, then worked himself out of his coats. The left sleeve of his shirt was crusty with dried blood. Rolling it up, he found that the bullet had hit him 3 inches above the elbow. Evidently, it had been almost spent, for it was lodged in the tough muscle. It hadn't gone in very far. Wayne could feel the hard lump in his flesh. At first, the wound hadn't hurt much, but now the numbness was gone. It felt hot and raw. It was swelling and throbbing. He folded his handkerchief and wrapped it around his arm, knotting it as tightly as he could with one hand in his teeth. He got back into his coat and topcoat, then released the bolt and looked toward the front door of the restaurant. The patrolman was no longer there. Drawing an easier breath, Wayne walked through the restaurant and went out. Raindrops drove into his face. He leaned against the whipping wind, keeping close to the buildings. He turned the corner in an effort to escape the lash of the storm. Abruptly, he stopped short. Another patrolman was moving toward him. The patrolman's head was lifted, and his eyes, shadowed by the visor of his rain cap, were directed straight at Wayne. Wayne set his jaw. Knowing that the cop's suspicions would be aroused if he turned and hurried away, he went on. Just ahead of him was another doorway. A legend was lettered in gold on the glass panes, Queen City Chronicle. Reasoning that a newspaper office would be the last place in the city that a fugitive would be expected to enter, he reached for the knob. The glass showed him a startling reflection. The cop was also turning toward the door. Wayne entered a foyer. On his right, it opened into a large room. A sign hung overhead, Advertising Department. There was a counter bearing another sign, Classified Section, and behind it sat many desks. None of the desks was occupied, and most of the overhead lights were out, but two young women were working behind the counter. Neither of them looked up at Wayne. He felt the surge of the wind as the entrance opened behind him. The patrolman was coming in. Still moving, Wayne turned to a door on the left. It was lettered, Press Room, no admittance. He stepped into a deafening din. Two gigantic presses were roaring. A score of pressmen wearing inky overalls were busy around them. The air was hot. The heat, with an odor of scorched paper, was coming from the stereotype machines, with their tanks of molten type metal at the farther end of the room. Nearby, two men were bending over a metal-topped table on which several page forms were lying. One of the men had shaggy white hair. In one blue-veined hand, he was holding a magnifying glass through which he was reading the type in a number of galley trays. He looked up curiously and said something which Stephen Wayne could not distinguish through the thunder of the presses. Wayne glanced around quickly, searching for another way out, but the door behind him was opening. The patrolman was following him. His nerves straining, Wayne checked a wild impulse to spin about, to thrust his way past the cop, to run. He forced himself to pretend that he was paying no attention to the patrolman, and that he was here for a legitimate purpose. Then he saw the headlines on the front pages of the newspapers that were pouring out of the presses. Cop surprises husband burying murdered wife in cellar. Wayne stood transfixed, staring at the damning black print. His throat dry, he watched several pressmen pick up armloads of the papers, deftly bind them with twine, and send the bundles tumbling down a chute. News to be rushed to every point of the city and to scores of nearby towns. Suddenly he was aware that the white-headed man was tapping his wounded arm. "Looking for the city room?" the old man shouted at him. Wayne eased his arm away. Over his shoulder, he saw that the cop was still standing in the doorway. He had to swallow some of the fire in his throat before he could answer. "Yes, yes," he shouted back. "Where is the city room?" "Upstairs," the hoary-headed man yelled. "Are you Lester?" He took Wayne's arm, and Wayne stiffened with pain. He brought his colorless lips close to Wayne's ear. "Are you Chick Lester?" Wayne chanced answering this question with a nod. The old man pulled him toward the door at which the cop was posted. He might have wrenched himself away if the cop had not at that moment wagged a comradely hand. The three of them stepped into the foyer. "My name's Lamb," the old man said, taking Wayne's hand and pumping it. "Makeup editor. Gifford's waiting for you." "Lester. Expected you hours ago. We've got plenty to keep us busy tonight." He turned to the patrolman. "Officer Harrigan, Mr. Lester," he introduced. "Bad night out to be hunting for a killer, isn't it, Harrigan?" "It is that," the patrolman said, mopping his face with his handkerchief. "Wet job, but we're hoping it'll soon be over. Not much chance of his getting away. Just thought I'd come in and wring a little of the rain out of me." Wayne drew a breath and ventured, "A murder? Tonight? Where?" "Lester's just come from Kansas City," Lamb explained to the patrolman. "Remember those pictures of the riot at the amalgamated plant there? He took 'em. Some of the best action shots I ever used. You're just in time. Lester Gifford's been howling his head off about having only one lensman on the job tonight. Come along with me, and he'll tell you about it." Because the patrolman was staying in the lobby, Wayne had no choice but to follow Lamb. They climbed 3 flights of iron stairs, then pushed through a pair of swinging doors into the city room. Wayne paused, coldly wondering if anyone here might recognize him. 5 young men and a girl were seated at desks, all pounding away on typewriters. They gave Wayne no more than a glance. At a desk in the far corner, a man wearing a green eye shade was quickly reading a sheaf of copy, holding a blue pencil poised. Lamb touched his shoulder. "Here's your new photog, Gifford." Gifford jumped out of his chair and grabbed Wayne's hand. He was a lanky young man with a clean-cut face that looked feverish. His intelligent eyes were filled with excitement. "Lester, am I glad to see you?" he exclaimed. "We've got the sweetest murder case in years. I've only had one cameraman since Samuel's left. You're taking Samuel's place. And he's been running around in circles trying to cover it all by himself since the case broke tonight. I want all the pictures I can get, the more the better. Since I got to be city editor, we've been using more pictures in a week than we used to in a month. You'll need to jump right into this. Jenkins will steer you around until you get the lay of the land. Those riot shots of yours were great. When Samuels quit, I knew you were the man I wanted. What kept you? Is the storm tying up the roads?" Wayne fumbled for an answer. "That's it. They're flooded in places. Nothing serious, but I had to take a detour. Sorry I couldn't get here sooner, but..." Before he could finish, a sudden interruption came. A door on the side of the room opened, and a dynamic little man inserted himself between Wayne and Gifford. He was red-headed and vociferously elated. He slapped several damp photographic prints onto Gifford's desk. "There's the murder victim, lying right where Orr found her," he said in a rush. "She was a beauty, wasn't she? Spoiled as hell, though, you can see it in her face. Look how little she's got on. I wish we could run it. We can't, though, because it would shock the natives, but I had to get it. The other one shows the hole her husband was digging in the cellar with a big poker. He hadn't gotten very far before Orr found him. Boy, how this is building up." The photograph of Nadine was lying directly in front of Wayne. Nadine dead, clad only in a thin silk film, lying on her back on the cement floor with 2 ghastly wounds in her chest. Beside her was the cavity in the cement, ragged and dark. A chill started to creep up Wayne's neck and spread down his spine. He closed his eyes. The red-headed man continued. "There's a long shot of the cellar, showing the corpse under a sheet. We can use that one. There's a close-up of the cellar windows with burlap bags tacked over them to keep light from shining out and attracting attention. He'd been planning this, Giff, planning it a long while. According to the neighbors," Gifford grabbed the hook of his telephone. "Press room," he barked. "Stop the presses," he ordered. "Hold them and break up page 1 for a new layout. Jenk just brought me some pics. Leave room for a 4-column spread. We'll have to wait for the cuts. Damn it, Ape, quit yelling and stop those presses." Wayne watched Gifford hand the photographs to Lamb. Peering through his magnifying glass, Lamb began preparing them for the engraver, working with brush and ink. Jenkins was still talking. "Listen, Giff. What the neighbors are saying makes this even tougher for the Wayne guy. The homicide boys have been asking questions and learning plenty about..." "What about a picture of Wayne?" Gifford asked quickly. "I want to plaster that guy's mug all over the front page. It'll help catch him if he's still on the loose tomorrow, help crack the case. I went all through that house trying to get one, but Inspector Early said they couldn't find any," Jenkins answered. "The Waynes didn't move into town until a couple of months ago, and the cops haven't uncovered any of their connections yet. Listen, Giff, about the neighbors, the Waynes were married less than a year ago, but their home life seems to have been one continual scrap. The people next door say they heard the wife once, yelling that she was going to divorce him and sock him for plenty of alimony. I get it. It got to be too much for Wayne to take, Gifford said. Jenk, he added with a gesture, this is Chick Lester. Jenkins gripped Wayne's hand eagerly. Lester, mighty glad to know you. I'm glad Samuels decided to go to New York and freelance, so now we've got a real lens hawk on the job. I'm pretty new at this game, and I'm hoping you can help me along with a few pointers. What say? I'll get you acquainted with the burg and you. Got your camera along, Lester? Gifford asked. No, I haven't, Wayne managed. Not tonight. You see my baggage. Get him Samuel's old box, Jenk, Gifford directed. Both of you boys are going to be hopping the rest of the night. You can't give me too many pics. Lester, I want you to get a good shot of the cop who caught Wayne red-handed. Wayne could only nod. Jenk couldn't get at him because he'd been called in to report. Gifford hurried on. His name is Orr. He's your most important assignment, but I want you to shoot everything else that looks good. You'll probably pick up something new at police headquarters. Jenk, take him over right away and introduce him to Inspector Early and Chief Beckett. Sure thing, Jenkins promised. Wayne said quietly, how about a press card? Gifford reached into a drawer in his desk. He took out a card, wrote the name of Charles Lester on it, then scrawled his signature. Wayne's fingers tingled as Gifford passed it to him. He saw it as a means of getting himself outside the police dragnet. Until the real Lester appeared, how soon, Wayne couldn't guess. It would help him conceal his identity and escape to another city. Determined to make the most of an opportunity that might vanish at any moment, Wayne was tucking the card into his wallet when the sudden opening of the swinging doors startled him. A man marched in, heavily muscular. His sleeves were rolled far up his hairy arms, and he was wearing an ink-spotted canvas apron. His head was lowered, eyes flashing with anger as he slammed his fist on Gifford's desk. Don't start yelling at me, ape, Gifford said quickly. You've got to hold the presses for— Great God, growled the big man. Every time I start an edition rolling, you howl at me to stop the presses, stop the presses. Damn it, Giff. I can't change the train schedules. Whenever the mail edition misses, I hear complaints from hundreds of farmers who get the paper 2 days late. The big boss jumps down my throat for that, not yours. I'm not stopping my presses for you every time you get a new picture. I'm getting my editions out on time. And don't call me ape. My name's Apperman. The presses were still rumbling in the basement. Wayne found a chance to gather himself while Gifford and Apperman argued. He allowed the eager Jenkins to lead him into a cubbyhole that was equipped as a darkroom. It was filled with the acrid smell of developing solutions rising from the trays on the bench. The shelves were cluttered with bottles and supplies, boxes of film and printing paper, cans of chemicals, and piles of flash bulbs. As Wayne tried to clarify his thoughts, Jenkins placed a camera in his hands. It's in good shape, and the speed gun's just been checked, Jenkins said. Here's a dozen holders in your case, all loaded, and plenty of bulbs. You're all set. Say, I've been looking forward to meeting you, Lester. I'm anxious to see how you work. Wayne's mind was far beyond the camera he was seemingly inspecting. You've got plenty to do tonight without having me on your hands, Jenk, he said quietly. Just tell me where headquarters is and I'll find my way. Wouldn't think of it, Jenkins demurred happily. It'll be a pleasure to show you around. The inspector and the chief are good guys, but you've got to know how to handle 'em. I'll be glad to give you the dope. Wayne's lips twitched. Altogether, you seem to be giving this Wayne chap the works, he said. Apparently the police are sure he's guilty. Say, we're going to town on this, all right, Jenkins agreed. It's open and shut. Wayne swallowed. No possibility that the police are wrong? Not any, Jenkins assured him blithely. Wayne is guilty as hell. Once the cops grab him, he's as good as hung. You might read about it in the galley proofs while I load up." Wayne eased out of the dark room and paused outside the door for a moment. A peculiar chill gathered around his heart. He glanced from one busy staff member to another, numbly marveling that none of them realized a fugitive wanted for murder was among them. None of them? His gaze stopped on the face of the girl sitting at one of the desks. She had stopped typing and was studying him with a puzzled expression. For a moment they locked eyes, her gaze curious, Wayne's filled with sharp misgivings. Her deep brown eyes and slightly parted lips suggested she might speak. Yet her long bobbed hair and jumper dress made her look almost like a schoolgirl, except she seemed too knowing. After a moment, her eyes dropped back to her work, but the puzzled expression lingered on her face. Troubled, Wayne moved toward Lamb's desk. A pug-nosed copyboy was standing beside it, impatiently waiting to whisk the pictures away the moment Lamb finished retouching them. Wayne leaned over Lamb's shoulder. The white-haired man was about to hand the prints to the boy when Wayne reached for them. He turned toward Gifford's desk. "See here," Wayne said. Gifford looked up. "Notice this," Wayne continued. "The bottom of this hole in the floor is flat. It couldn't have been left like that if Wayne had been digging with a big poker. In fact, no matter what tool was used, it wouldn't leave a surface as perfectly even as this." Gifford inspected the picture. "Must be the lighting that makes it look that way," he said. He looked back at Wayne with growing interest. Wayne hesitated but risked another comment. Supposedly, Wayne was about to bury his wife's body, conceal it. To do that, he'd have to restore the floor afterward. "But look at this other picture. It shows almost the whole cellar. I don't see anything he might have used for that. Jenks said Wayne had planned everything, but, well, for instance, there isn't even a bag of cement." Wayne held Gifford's sharp gaze. "Doesn't mean anything," Gifford said. "If he'd already gotten some cement to patch the floor, it might be out of range of the camera, or in the garage or somewhere else. Maybe he planned to buy it tomorrow. Don't worry, the cops will check." "What are you driving at, Lester? Picking up a hunch that Wayne isn't guilty? Why?" Wayne forced a smile. "It strikes me as a good angle, playing up both sides of the case. It would make a better story if we let the police work on their theory that Wayne is guilty, while we try to find evidence to prove he's innocent." Gifford shook his head emphatically. "We don't try to show up the police department. That guy's guilty as hell. He hasn't got a chance. Hustle up that picture of Patrolman Orr as fast as you can, will you, Lester?" Gifford returned to slashing at a messy copy with his blue pencil. The copy boy snatched the pictures from Wayne's hand and rushed out through the swinging doors. Shoulders sagging, Wayne turned from the city editor's desk. He picked up a fresh copy of the Chronicle that had just been brought up from the press room. The condemning headlines shouted at him. He scanned the body of the story. It read, "Although the record of Patrolman George Orr, who surprised Wayne beside the dead body of Mrs. Wayne in the cellar of the house on Sycamore Drive, shows that he has been disciplined for using his gun too freely, as well as for insubordination and absence from his post without leave. He has, on the other hand, distinguished himself several times by capturing wanted criminals in the face of great danger. Orr's most important capture was made about 4 years ago near where Mrs. Wayne was murdered. The Sycamore Drive development was then under construction. Orr discovered Leonard Nolan hiding in one of the unfinished houses. Nolan had committed a payroll robbery earlier that day at the Eureka manufacturing plant. He had been recognized but had escaped with his loot. Following his capture by Patrolman Orr, Nolan was convicted and sentenced to the state prison. Wayne's mind stirred. He rapidly read a short news item under a separate headline that followed these paragraphs. Leonard Nolan, convicted of stealing a $20,000 payroll from the Eureka Manufacturing Company 4 years ago, completed his sentence at the state prison yesterday and was released. Nolan has returned to this city. seeking more information about his own status in the case. Wayne's eyes lifted to an earlier passage in the column. Mrs. Wayne had lived most of her life in this city, but Stephen Wayne is a relative newcomer, having arrived about a year ago as an adjuster for a nationally known automobile insurance company. The police immediately began obtaining a detailed description and a photograph of Wayne from the insurance company's files. At headquarters, the theory was initially held that Wayne might be concealing himself. "Okay," a voice interrupted at Wayne's elbow. "Come along." His nerves snapped. He looked up, expecting to find himself confronted by a detective who had already penetrated his masquerade. But it was Jenkins, the red-headed cameraman, his case slung over one shoulder. A relieved breath drained from Wayne's lungs. He tried to muster a smile in response to Jenkins' eagerness. "Yes," he said quietly, "let's get going." Turning, he saw that the girl was still standing near him, her eyes still puzzled. Again, she seemed about to speak, to ask him something. Wayne found himself dreading her unspoken words. "This is Chick Lester, Sue," he heard the cameraman saying at his side. "Chick, this is Sue Carey. She's not only our society editor, but writes the Beauty Hints column too." Wayne forced himself to say cordially, "Hello, Sue. With such ability, you should be on the news side." Sue Carey extended her small hand into his. "I'd like to be, but Giff won't give me the chance. He doesn't like sob sisters, but one of these days I'm going to prove to him that I'm equal to the job." Her eyes searched Wayne's face. Quietly, she added, watching his reaction, "I've got a hunch that maybe I'll soon find my chance." "Well, good luck," Wayne said quickly. Jenkins was at the swinging doors, signaling him to hurry. Full of mounting unease, Wayne was conscious that Sue Carey's gaze was still following him. Jenkins's eager manner suggested he had every intention of sticking close to Wayne. "You've got an assignment of your own, haven't you, Jenk?" Wayne said. "There's no need for you to waste time steering me around when I can just as easily." "I've got to stop in at headquarters first myself," Jenkins answered. "It's just around the corner. Anyway, I want to see how you handle it when you get your shot of ore." Wayne's lips drew thin. Though his false identity was affording him a short respite from the manhunt, a feeling of hopelessness weighed upon him. The odds were heavily against him avoiding arrest for much longer. To face ore would mean his immediate unmasking, and soon, perhaps at any moment, the real Lester would show up and report to Gifford. Even if Wayne made a break for it now, and succeeded in escaping the city with the aid of his press card, his movements would be traced, and he would be dragged back. Inevitably, before the night was done, he would stand revealed as the fugitive wanted for murder. But until that moment came, he would have an opportunity to learn firsthand, as he could in no other way, how the case was building up against him. His decision, grimly made, was to continue to play his part as long as possible. He examined his camera as he followed Jenkins down the iron stairway. He had never handled one like it. Compared with the little Leica he owned, the speed graphic seemed a complicated machine. The flash gun affixed to it made it even more formidable. He had never used one. Though he was familiar with the principles of photography, he lacked experience with this particular type of equipment. He had scarcely time for a good look at the shutter and the rangefinder before Jenkins was pushing out into the street. The rain had slackened. Wayne slipped the camera into his case. Striding along with Jenkins, he became acutely conscious of his arm. The pain was sharpening. There was grave danger, he realized, that an infection might set in. He saw blue-coated patrolmen still moving about the streets. Abruptly, he found himself at the door of police headquarters. Jenkins escorted him down the corridor. They passed neat offices in which men were efficiently busy. His nerves tightening each moment, Wayne followed Jenkins through a door lettered, "Inspector Early." "Back on the job," Jenkins announced to the crisp-looking man at the desk. "Inspector, meet one of the best lens luggers in the business, Chick Lester. Lester wants to get a shot of Patrolman Orr." Early's big hand closed over Wayne's. "Hello, Lester. Orr's busy right now. The chief's talking to him. You'll have to wait until he comes out. You know how camera-shy Beckett is, Jenk." The inspector jerked a thumb toward the adjoining office. The tight muscles across Wayne's chest eased a little. "On your way to the morgue, Jenk?" "They finished the autopsy on her. We've got the 2 bullets that killed her, one of them out of her heart. They're being photographed in the lab now. I expect they'll help to pin this thing on Wayne all the tighter." Jenkins was getting ready with his camera. Watching him make the adjustments, Wayne duplicated them on his own box. "Have you any idea where Wayne is, Inspector?" Wayne inquired quietly. "Pretty close to the end of his rope," Early answered bluntly. "He's crazy to try to make a getaway. He doesn't stand a chance." "Okay, Jenk?" Jenkins' shutter clicked and the flashbulb glared. He stepped back, glancing expectantly at Wayne. Without being sure that his camera was set correctly, Wayne drew out the slide of the film holder, climbed onto a chair, aimed the lens downward at Early, and pressed the shutter release. To his immense relief, the shutter clicked and the bulb flashed. "Nice angle," Jenkins said. "How about those bullets, Inspector? You're going to give me a couple pictures of them, aren't you?" Early nodded, eyeing Wayne. "We'll work right along with you. You'll find we've got a first-class department here, Lester. Our lab is the best in the country outside of New York and Newark. We welcome every new scientific development that'll help us catch crooks. The whole department's on special duty in this case. Organization and advanced methods, that's the way we work. All the lawyers in the state won't be able to get Wayne off a first-degree rap. Not even if he's innocent," Wayne asked softly. Early guffawed. "Very funny," he remarked, as if Wayne had intended it for a wisecrack. "The case is all sewed up right now, but just for good measure, we want to get our hands on one more piece of evidence. We'll probably find it on Wayne when we grab him, the gun he used. Anything else I can do for you boys?" Wayne said, "I'd like to take a look around." Jenkins turned to follow, but Wayne winked. With a knowing nod, Jenkins drew back, perched himself on a corner of the inspector's desk, and invited further conversation. Wayne walked down the corridor and out the entrance. The fact that Gifford was counting on him to deliver a picture of Orr sent him around to the side of the building. He was still determined to prolong his masquerade in order to pick up all the information possible. He walked through a parking lot until he reached the rear corner. The windows of Chief Beckett's office were above his head. Wayne pulled the discharged flashbulb out of the synchronizer, sank a fresh one into the socket, reversed the plate holder, then repeated the settings he had seen Jenkins make. With his camera cocked, he climbed onto a sedan that was sitting beneath the windows. He stood on top, gazing into the office. Orr was facing the chief's desk. Wayne vividly remembered his hard features and ominously confident manner. He could not hear the report Orr was making, but the man seated at the desk was listening intently. Chief Beckett's bearing was severely military. His face was florid, his nose bulbous and red. Wayne aimed his camera, focused carefully through the rangefinder, then thumbed the plunger. The glare of the flash filled the office. Orr and Beckett spun about. Wayne jumped off the car, hoping grimly that the picture would satisfy Gifford, and that in this way he could avoid coming face to face with Orr. When he reached the entrance of headquarters, he met Jenkins coming out. Jenkins looked jubilant. He grasped Wayne's arm and pulled him away from the door. "Nice work," he exclaimed. "You're the first photog who ever caught Beckett unawares. He's so sensitive about that schnozzle he won't let any of us turn a lens in his direction. He came out of his office roaring, so we'd better wait until he cools off. I hope your shot's good, Lester. It's just the sort of stuff Giff likes. Better hop back and put it through the soup. I'm going over to the morgue. See you later." Jenkins hurried across the street. Wayne walked slowly toward the Chronicle office. His mind reverted to the paragraphs he had read in the early edition. There was something about them that bothered him, like a splinter caught in his mind. He was lost in thought until he reached the entrance of the building. There he paused, gazing alertly at a taxi that was just stopping at the curb. A thin young man was clambering out of it. He had a bulging suitcase and a smaller case like the one Wayne was carrying. Galvanized, Wayne opened the door, swung his own case inside, then turned back. The thin young man was paying off the driver. "Hello," Wayne said. "You're Lester, aren't you?" "That's right." Lester looked hurried and tired. "You on the paper?" "I'm Gifford," Wayne said. Lester gripped Wayne's hand. "Are you Gifford? Sorry as hell I'm so late. The damn bus I was on got bogged down. I had to help pull it out of the mud. I'd have been here on time if—" "That's okay," Wayne said. "We're busy tonight, but we've got everything covered. You look pretty wet. You'd better find yourself a room in a hotel. No need for you to work tonight." Lester sighed with relief. "That's damn decent of you, Gifford. Fact is, if I don't get a hot bath, I'll come down with a lousy cold. I'll be around tomorrow about 5. "Fine," Wayne said. He helped Lester heave the cases back into the taxi. Lester gave him a farewell salute, and the cab turned about. Wayne drew a deep breath as it swerved from sight at the corner. He turned back to the door and stopped short. Sue Carey was standing just outside the entrance. She had put on an oilskin coat and a jaunty little hat perched on her head. Again she was gazing at him in that strangely wise way of hers. He went to her slowly. "Think you're going to like it here, Mr. Lester?" she quietly inquired. "Much better than the spot I was in before I came," he answered. She walked out into the rain. Wayne's anxious eyes followed her for a moment. He stepped in, took up his case, ran up the stairs to the city room, and immediately turned to the dark room. Gifford was busy and did not glance up. Closing and bolting the door, Wayne peeled off his trench coat. He felt of his wounded arm. It was swelling and the blood was pounding through it hotly. His mouth set and he turned to the trays. He acquainted himself with the layout on the bench, then switched off the lights. In total darkness, because he surmised his film was Super Pan, he opened his holders. He remembered reading in a photographic magazine that newspaper cameramen, usually pressed for time, used rapid developers. After 2 minutes, he turned on the dim green light. In 2 more minutes, the images on the films looked strong. He rinsed them, then slid them into the tray of hypo. The rapidity with which they cleared surprised him. While they hung in the circulating wash water, he found a tray that smelled strongly of alcohol. That would be a rapid drying solution. He printed the negatives, and after using the rapid dryer again, turned on the white light. The shot of Early was crisp and clear. That of Orr and Beckett in the chief's office was not quite as good. Strangely pleased, Wayne took the prints out to the city desk. Gifford scanned them quickly. "Orr reporting to the chief," Wayne explained. "Instead of waiting, I tried a candid shot through the window." "Good," Gifford said. "We'll use it. That's the type of stuff I want. But I still need a close-up portrait of Orr." "He'll be busy a while," Wayne said quickly. "Won't this one fill the bill?" "Get Orr again as soon as you can," Gifford insisted. "A straight shot. Also, try having him aim his gun straight at the camera and see how it turns out. Any new leads?" "I'm just getting acquainted with the setup," Wayne said. "But I may have something soon." Gifford nodded, passed the prints to Lamb, and turned back to his blue-slashed copy. Wayne asked quietly of the white-headed man, "Where are the files, back issues?" Lamb indicated a door at the far corner of the room. Beyond it, Wayne found racks loaded with bound copies of the Chronicle. Selecting one dated just 4 years ago, he split it open on a large tilted table and began flipping from front page to front page. Presently, he found the story of the payroll robbery at the Eureka plant and the capture of the criminal. Leonard Nolan's photograph, taken at headquarters following his arrest, showed him to be a sunken-cheeked, sly-eyed young man with an expression of dazed defeat. Another half-tone showed Orr, characteristically hard-faced and confident, but thinner. There was a view of the Sycamore Drive development, showing half a dozen houses in various stages of development, with an arrow indicating the one, not far from number 5750, where Nolan had been captured. Wayne followed the story of the crime to the stage at which the headlines shouted Nolan's conviction. The deciding evidence at the trial was the identification of Nolan as the lone stick-up man by several eyewitnesses to the robbery. The defense pleaded that the lack of material evidence raised a reasonable doubt of Nolan's guilt, since the loot, not having been found, could not be directly connected with him. The police, in fact, are still searching for the stolen money, the loss of which was covered by bond. The testimony of the eyewitnesses, however, added to the fact that Nolan's alibi was proved false by the prosecutor, was deemed sufficient by the jury to— Wayne winced as something touched his throbbing arm. His breath stopped. He lifted his head quickly. Sue Carey was standing beside him, gazing at him with open-eyed apprehension, her lips parted, her breath coming rapidly. "Why are you pretending to be Chick Lester?" she asked. His shoulders sagged, a feeling of nausea suffused him. He began in a husky tone. "What makes you think I'm—" His voice faded. It was no good, trying to put something over on this girl. Her eyes were too wise. "I know you're not Chick Lester," she said. "I met him once, about a year ago, when I was visiting out of town. You're not anything like him." Wayne made a gesture of despair. "That stops me," he admitted. He saw that Sue Carey was pale, that she was trying to keep herself from trembling. After a moment he asked, "Why haven't you told Gifford? I want to learn the rest of it first. Why you're impersonating Chick Lester, and who you really are. It's my story, and I want to spring it on Giff all at once, so he'll realize I can handle real news." "I think you'll get your wish, Sue," Wayne said evenly. You don't know who I am?" She shook her head. "No." He leaned toward her tensely. "Look here. You want your chance, and I want one for myself. You'll have a bigger story than you expect if you'll play along with me a little while. Can't we make a bargain between us?" She hesitated. I don't quite know what you mean." "I'll tell you the whole story if you'll listen, if you'll try to believe me. All I want in return is a little time, a few hours. Is there any place where we can talk alone?" She thought a moment uneasily. "My apartment is only a block from here." "Giff won't miss us if we talk fast," Wayne said quickly. "You're not afraid to go there with me, are you?" "Yes," she admitted. "Yes, I am, but if I let it make any difference, I'll never be any good as a reporter. I think the chance is worth taking." "Good girl," Wayne said. "You'll be all right." He left the file room quickly. He was glad that Gifford didn't glance up. Sue followed him out the swinging doors. They walked through the rain rapidly. The girl glanced at Wayne repeatedly, anxious yet determined. Her apartment was cozy and quiet. He eased his arm and sank into a chair. She remained standing near the door, warily estimating him. He smiled. "I won't hurt you." No, I don't think you will," she answered, but her voice was not quite steady. "You don't seem the type. You're not a crook, though, are you?" "I'm Stephen Wayne." She stood there staring at him. "Don't let that frighten you," he said earnestly. She was motionless. "Judging from all I've heard," Wayne went on, "I haven't a prayer of clearing myself, but I've got to try anyway. I didn't deliberately set out to impersonate Chick Lester. I was sort of jockeyed into it. Then I realized it was a chance to work undercover and unearth some evidence in my favor, if there is any. That's why I want a little time, just a few hours, so I can at least make a stab at it." "Stephen Wayne working in our own city room," the girl said in a hushed tone. "You expect me to keep quiet about that?" His drawn smile faded. "I suppose it is too much to ask. It's the sort of story you've been dreaming about, isn't it? And all your own. Well, then perhaps you'd better listen. You'll have to have the facts, won't you?" She said anxiously, "Yes. I wish you wouldn't be so nervous." She moved to a chair and sat in it stiffly. You don't look like the sort who'd—" She could get no further than that. "Thanks," he said wryly. "That's the first kind word I've heard about myself since it happened. I wonder if you'll believe me." "I don't know. I can't blame you for being doubtful. Look here. Perhaps this would be easier for both of us if you were doing something while I talk. Would you mind taking a look at my arm?" He shook off his coats. He felt Sue stiffen when she saw his bloody sleeve, but she helped him to roll it up. As she gazed at the wound, her face turned white. She stepped quickly into the bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet. "Have you a pair of tweezers?" he asked. "The bullet isn't in very far." She came back slowly. Did you kill your wife?" she asked, almost inaudibly. "No," Wayne said. She hesitated another moment, gazing at his wound. "That's a job for a doctor." "I can't go to a doctor. He'd notify the police immediately. You'd lose your story too. Do you think you can get the bullet out?" "I can try if you can stand it." "Try," he urged. He watched her gratefully while she sterilized the tweezers, boiling them in a pan on the gas stove in her tiny kitchen. She brought bandages and adhesive tape and a bottle of antiseptic. Taking up the tweezers, she steadied herself. "You won't hurt me," he said. "Get it out, that's the important thing." His right hand clenched the arm of the chair. The sharp points of the tweezers felt white-hot. Sweat broke out on his forehead. He could hear Sue breathing rapidly. Presently something hard fell into the pan of water. Lifting his head, he saw the bullet. "Good work," he said hoarsely. "Didn't hurt a bit." "This is iodine," she warned him. The room began to spin. He clamped his eyes shut. Minutes passed before the burning lessened and became bearable. When he looked up again, the girl was taping a bandage neatly over the wound. Next, she put a tall glass into his hand. It was half full of scotch. He drank some of it. "Thanks," he said. "It feels better already." She sat opposite him, looking like a frightened child. "I didn't do much talking, did I?" he observed. "I'm afraid I'm not the Gable type. For instance, I realize now that I was a damned fool to break away from that cop." "Why did you?" "I'm not sure," Wayne said. "I told him that whoever had killed my wife must be somewhere near the house. I tried to get him to go outside and look around. He wouldn't, naturally. All I could think of was that if somebody didn't go outside and try to find the murderer, he'd get away and never be seen again. That's why I ran out, hoping to find some trace of him. Of course I didn't. I hadn't a chance. After that, I realized how black it looked for me, and there was nothing I could do but try to stay out of reach of the police." Sue asked quickly, "What made you think that somebody was outside and close?" "While I was unlocking the front door, I heard somebody going out the back way." "You mean you came home when somebody was down in the cellar, digging that hole in the floor?" Wayne leaned toward the girl. "I'd just come from the office. I'd been working there alone, writing up some late reports. I realize this is no good as an alibi. I haven't any. I thought I'd better tell you everything from the beginning. My car is being overhauled, so I took the bus out to Sycamore Drive and walked the 3 blocks from the bus stop to my house. The house was dark. I thought Nadine had gone to bed. Evidently, when you had went, but," Sue interrupted quickly, "are you sure you heard somebody going out the back?" "I can't prove it, of course," Wayne said. "Whoever was down in the cellar, he'd heard me crossing the front porch. He had time to get out before I unlocked the door. I went into the kitchen to get a bottle of beer, and I noticed that the cellar door was standing ajar and a light was shining down there. I found my wife lying at the foot of the stairs. The big poker from the furnace was lying across her. I picked it up, and just then the cop came down. Didn't Patrolman Orr see anybody sneaking away from there? He said he'd heard a pounding sound, and he'd been standing in the garden at the side of the house, listening and watching. He hadn't seen me come in. That's reasonable, as there's a high hedge, and if the man who'd gone out the back way had ducked behind the garage, the cop wouldn't have seen him. All the circumstances put together. Wayne clenched his hands. Nadine and I were never happy. In fact, we were miserable together. We seemed to bring out the worst in each other, but it was never so bad that I'd be driven to kill her. You can't prove any of this, Sue said. Not one detail, Wayne admitted. He searched her eyes. But do you believe me? Somehow I can't help it, she said. Thanks, Wayne said quietly. Will you let me have the few hours I want? But what can you do? You're taking a chance, you know, he reminded her. I may make another break for it as soon as I get outside your door. The cops may pick me up, and then you'll be left out in the cold on the story. Had you thought of that? Yes, but what can you do in so little time? There's something my mind keeps grasping at, Wayne said quickly. I know Nadine didn't have any enemies. Nobody hated her enough to kill her. She hadn't any lover, so that angle is out. Something came in from outside, something that meant her death because she was in the way. It's very vague, but things connect up. Do you know where I can find a man named Leonard Nolan? Sue shook her head. 4 years ago, Nolan was captured not far from the house I leased on Sycamore Drive. Yesterday, he was let out of prison. Tonight, somebody came into that house for some reason and killed Nadine. Put it all together, that and a lot more I haven't found out yet, and it means something. That's why I want a little more time, so I can try to learn the rest. Then you'd better get busy. You won't have long. No, Wayne agreed. I won't have long. He rose and closed his hand on her arm. You're swell. Maybe I'm crazy, she said, but I don't think so. Together, they stepped out of the apartment. Sue paused. Just a minute, she said quietly. She went back in, closing the door. Wayne waited in the hall until she reappeared a moment later. She was still wary of him, but thoughtful. Walking quickly through the rain, they turned back to the Chronicle plant. I wish there was some way I could keep the story for you when the big news breaks, one way or the other, Wayne said. You rate it. Maybe not, the girl answered. Maybe Gift's right. Maybe I'm not built to be a real reporter. I could turn you in and get a byline under a big screamer head, but somehow that doesn't seem to be the most important point. If I didn't give you the chance you want, if you were hauled up and tried and convicted, and she pushed her hands deep into the pockets of her coat. I'd always have to think that if it weren't for me, it wouldn't have happened that way. I guess my conscience means more to me than a few headlines. Wayne's hand held her arm snugly. Gift's right, he said gently. But Lord, you don't know how grateful I am for that. As they reached the Chronicle building, they saw Jenkins piling out of a taxi. They caught up with him at the door. Wayne stopped him and signaled to Sue with a glance. She hurried in. Jenkins gave Wayne a puzzled frown. Have you got any pics you'll have to put through right away? Wayne asked quickly. I've got one of the woman in the morgue, but we probably won't be able to run it, Jenkins said. What's up? I've picked up a new lead, Wayne said. It may build into something big. I'll need you along. Listen, Leonard Nolan came back to town yesterday from state prison. Where can we find him? Jenkins shrugged. He might have crawled into any one of 1,000 different holes. What about him? But isn't there any way we can connect with him? Bill would probably know, Jenkins said. Who's Bill? Bill Mahoney runs a saloon on the other side of the railroad tracks. He knows everybody. Get in, Wayne said. He had signaled the taxi to wait, and now he pushed Jenkins into it. Jenkins gave the driver an address, and the cab ground away. Rain eddied in the windows and the streetlights flashed past. The red-headed photographer gazed at Wayne curiously. "What's this add up to?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Wayne confessed. "It may come to nothing at all. On the other hand, it may crack the case." "Pin it on Wayne?" "So far as that goes, the case is already cracked. Pin it on somebody else," Wayne said. Jenkins snorted. "That's out. We're wasting our time. Say you're a stranger here in town. How come you're going off on a crazy hunch like this? Where'd you get this cockeyed idea that Wayne didn't do it?" Wayne smiled slowly. "That's my own peculiar angle," he said. Jenkins studied him with a strange light in his eyes. When the cab pulled to the curb, he asked the driver to wait. Bill's place was a sooty brick building. The air inside was heady with the fumes of many years' slopping of beer and liquor. An automatic phonograph was playing so loudly that the bass notes jarred the glasses behind the bar. Jenkins ordered 2 beers from the barrel-bellied man, who was officiating at the spigots. "This is Chick Lester, Bill," Jenkins said. "Just started working for the paper tonight. We're after a little friendly information." Bill said nothing. "Happen to know where Leonard Nolan is, Bill?" Wayne inquired. Bill wiped his beefy hands on his dirty apron, scowling at Wayne. "Lenny's a good guy," he growled. "Lenny's all right. He took his rap and he's going straight. You guys leave Lenny alone." "Sure, he's all right," Jenkins said. "We just want to talk to him, that's all." "A guy just come out of stir ought to be let alone," Bill said. "There was a guy in here already asking about him, wanting to check up. He ain't got nothing to hide. He took a room in the place down at the end of the block. 2nd floor, back. Ain't seen him since morning, but he ought to be there. I don't want you mugs to make any trouble for a right guy like Lenny. You ought to lay off a guy what's just come out of stir." "Thanks, Bill," Wayne said. They closed the door on the reek and the deafening music. Wayne signaled the cab driver, and he followed them to the farther end of the block. The rooming house was a sooty frame structure on the edge of the railroad yards. The lights in the hall were dim, and the stairs creaked. Wayne knocked on Nolan's door. He turned the knob when he heard a groan. With Jenkins beside him, he went in quickly. When they found the light and snapped it on, they saw that Nolan was stretched out on his back on the floor. He was wearing a cheap pair of pajamas. In semi-conscious agony, he was rolling his head from side to side. He was clutching the ragged carpet in his fists. His face was blotched with dried blood, and his hair was matted. He groaned and mumbled. Kneeling over him, Wayne and Jenkins saw that he had been beaten over the head. His scalp was gashed, and the bare bone looked cracked. "Judas," Jenkins blurted. Wayne shook him gently. "Lenny," Nolan muttered, "get that light out of my eyes." The words were almost indistinguishable. Nolan's lips were split and swollen from other brutal blows. "Get it out of my eyes. I don't know where it is. I don't know." "Who the hell are you?" "That light." "Who?" He swallowed his voice. "We've got to get an ambulance," Jenkins said in a hushed tone. Suddenly, Nolan shouted hoarsely, "I'll tell you. Quit hittin' me. I'll tell you where I hit it." Again, Wayne shook him. "Lenny, Lenny." Nolan groaned and gripped the carpet. Wayne came to his feet. As he turned to the door, Jenkins stepped back with his camera lifted. An instant glare filled the room. Jenkins shifted for another shot while Wayne hurried out. In the lower hall, Wayne found a pay telephone on the wall. He was disconnecting when Jenkins ran down the stairs. "Who the hell did that to him?" Jenkins said quickly. "I don't know," Wayne said, "but I've got a damned good idea why. I've just phoned for an ambulance. There's nothing we can do for him. Listen, Jenk, we've got to play our cards close to the chest. We can tell the cops about it afterward if we find anything." "If we find what?" Jenkins asked. Without answering him, Wayne hurried out to the taxi. Jenkins clambered in after him. He told the driver, 5700 block on Sycamore Drive, stop at the near corner. The taxi swerved off through the rain. Automatically busy with his camera, Jenkins peered at Wayne. For a guy who's been in town just a couple of hours, you're certainly going places, he observed. How come you had this lead to Nolan? What the hell's eating you? You look white as a ghost. Listen to this, Wayne said earnestly. All the facts are printed in the Chronicle. 4 years ago, Lenny Nolan stole a payroll amounting to $20,000. Within a few hours, he was pinched, but nobody ever found that money. How far is it from the Eureka plant to Sycamore Drive? A couple of miles. How did Nolan happen to be hiding out there that night? Jenkins gestured. A lot of half-built houses, he said. A good place. No lights, plenty of holes to crawl into. Why not? Wayne was silent for a moment. Bill said a man came into the saloon today and asked about Nolan. Earlier tonight, somebody walked in on him unexpectedly. That man kept a light in Nolan's eyes so he couldn't see. You heard him say, "Quit hitting me, and I'll tell you where I hid it." What did he hide? Jenkins asked. Suddenly he realized. The money, that 20 grand. God knows where it is now, Wayne said. Maybe there've been plenty of chances to ditch it somewhere else. Maybe not. It would be damned hot money if he'd been caught. Perhaps he didn't dare take it far. Who? Jenkins said. If who'd been caught? The taxi was turning to the curb. Wayne told the driver to wait. Jenkins swung into step with him as they walked toward the house at 5750. The windows of Wayne's home were lighted. 2 cars were sitting in front of it. Cops, Jenkins said. What the hell are you up to, Lester? We've got to be quiet about it, Wayne warned. We're going to take a look around, but we don't want them to know. Wayne was conscious of Jenkins's suspicious stare as they passed the house. When they were near the next corner, where the streetlight was burning, where the bullet had struck his arm, Wayne turned back. Jenkins followed him into the driveway. At the rear of the house, Wayne paused again, scanning the grounds. He must have come this way, he murmured. Who? Jenkins asked in a whisper. He didn't dare risk getting caught with it, Wayne said, half to himself. He had to get rid of it somewhere, and gamble that it would still be there when he came back. He didn't have time to bury it. There aren't any refuse cans back here. Nothing that would suggest itself as a hiding place. He had to move fast and... Who? Jenkins insisted. Wayne turned to the garage. One of the doors was standing ajar. He tugged Jenkins in after him, then closed the door noiselessly. He snapped a switch, and light glared down from a bulb overhead. There was no car in the garage. Wayne looked around. He hasn't had a chance to come back yet, Wayne said. There have been cops in the house ever since she was found dead. He's had to stay clear and wait. It must still be somewhere around here. He gazed at the perturbed Jenkins. We're looking for a bundle, not a large one. Try to find it. Listen, Jenkins said. Where the hell are you getting all these cockeyed ideas, Lester? Wayne opened a tool cabinet above a bench. No bundle was hidden there. He scanned the floor. It was cement, unbroken at any spot. In one corner an oil drum stood. He leaned over it, but the space behind it was empty. He was conscious that Jenkins, without knowing why, was also searching. He heard a sound and turned to see Jenkins probing into a large bag of cotton waste. Something hard in here, Jenkins said. Wait, Wayne cautioned. He pulled his camera out of its case and adjusted it. The click of the shutter caught Jenkins reaching into the bag. As Wayne reversed the plate holder, Jenkins dug deeper. Wayne fired the second bulb when Jenkins had the bag spilled over, with some of the waste raked out. The soiled bundle embedded in the cotton was clearly visible. Now Jenkins was moving almost too quickly, but Wayne flashed him as he was lifting the bundle. It was wrapped in old brown paper. Bits of earth, gravel, and cement were clinging to it. Jenkins ripped off a corner of the rotten paper. Wayne stepped closer and focused on the pack of banknotes protruding from the open corner, and flashed a close-up. "The money Nolan stole!" Jenkins exclaimed. Wayne's pulse was swift. He switched off the light, looked out cautiously, made sure the detectives inside the house had not noticed their operations, then hustled Jenkins along the driveway. Their strides stretched as they returned to the taxi. "Chronicle Building," Wayne directed the driver. The cab started up. Jenkins glanced at his stopwatch and revised Wayne's instructions. "Drop me off at police headquarters." Turning eagerly, he gripped Wayne's injured arm. Wayne winced. "What's the matter? You hurt?" Wayne, busy inspecting the bundle, did not answer. The suspicion in Jenkins' eyes sharpened. "How the hell did you get into this setup so fast? How could you know?" Wayne broke in. "This money is the reason Nolan was hiding out among those unfinished houses that night 4 years ago. He went there to hide his loot. The cement in the cellar of 5750 must have just been laid. It was still soft. He buried the money in it and smoothed it over. It's been there ever since. Nolan planned to come back for it." "Wait a minute," Jenkins said. "Nolan didn't get the chance. Somebody got to him and forced him to tell where he'd hidden the dough." "That's it," Wayne said quickly. "Then that man went to the Wayne place tonight. There wasn't any car in the garage, so he thought nobody was at home. He got into the house some way, not knowing that NAD, Mrs. Wayne, was asleep in the bedroom upstairs. She heard him digging and came down to investigate, probably thinking it was her husband, and she saw a stranger taking the bundle out of that hole in the floor. In order to keep it, he had to silence her. Just then Wayne came home and—" "Wait a minute," Jenkins protested again. "How do you know that? How do you know Wayne?" Urgently, Wayne interrupted again. "Here's headquarters. Give me your shots of Nolan. I'll try to have them ready to print by the time you get back. But listen." Wayne all but spilled Jenkins out of the cab. His orders sent the taxi forward at once. Jenkins stared after Wayne before he hurried into police headquarters. Entering the city room, Wayne dropped his case beside the door. Then his eyes stopped on Sue Carey. She was perched tensely in front of her typewriter, hard at work. Wayne knew at once it was no cut-and-dried society item she was writing. She looked up and her cheeks reddened at the sight of him. She went on typing, but more slowly. Wayne smiled and said, "Okay, but make it your best." Then he went to Gifford's desk. "My God, Lester, where have you been?" Gifford asked in a harassed tone. "Apperman is beginning to roll the final right now, and you haven't got that new shot of George Orr. What the hell kind of a—" "We've got some better picks than that one would be," Wayne interrupted, putting the bundle down in front of Gifford. "That's the payroll stolen by Lenny Nolan 4 years ago. Nolan was damned near killed tonight by somebody who forced him to tell where he'd cached it. Jenk and I found it. It had been taken out of that hole in the cellar floor of the Wayne place and transferred to the garage. Nolan's on his way to the hospital now." Instinctively, his eyes rounded. Gifford had reached for the telephone. "Press room," he urged. "Stop those presses, Ape. I said stop 'em. My God, don't yell at me. Tear up page 1. We've got a new lead and some more picks. I don't give a damn what you say. We're holding the final." Rapidly, Wayne repeated the story he had outlined to Jenkins. Gifford kept nodding and looking amazed, but there was a skeptical glint in his eyes. "Wayne's out of this case now, Giff," Wayne argued. "Certainly he didn't beat that information out of Nolan. He didn't dig up that money. He didn't." "Why not?" Gifford interrupted. "He could have done all that as well as any other man. But suppose he didn't know anything about it. That doesn't clear him. If that spot under the cellar stairs was picked out by Nolan as the best place to hide the money, then Wayne picked it out as the best place to bury the wife he'd murdered. He turned up the money by accident. That's all. This is a swell break, Lester, but never mind the angles. Leave the question of Wayne's guilt to the courts. I'll get this written. You owe God." The doors had swung open, and Apperman was charging in. Gifford threw up his hands in harried resignation, and Apperman slammed his big fist on the desk. "You hear those presses rolling?" the foreman bellowed. "They're going to keep on rolling. We've missed the deadline on the final already because you held me up on the mail. Distribution's cursing me from hell to breakfast because the whole system's shot. Nothing's going to stop those presses now, you understand? And let me tell you something else. My name's Apperman, not Ape." Gifford had no immediate opportunity to contest the point. Another swing of the doors produced Jenkins. The red-headed cameraman shouldered Apperman aside and slapped 2 photographs on Gifford's desk. "There's the lab's pics of the bullets that killed the woman, magnified 10 times. Did Lester tell you what we turned up?" He faced Wayne breathlessly. "We can't hold out on the police. They play ball with us, so we play ball with them. I had to tell them all about it. Inspector Early wants to see you. He can't figure it out, and neither can I, how you can know so damned much about this case." It was coming now, Wayne felt. His brief respite was coming to an end hopelessly. "Never mind, Jenk," Gifford said, swinging the ballistics photographs to Lamb's desk. "For God's sake, put those new pics of yours through the soup." He swung upon Wayne. "I still want that shot of George Orr. I phoned him and got him to come over. He's waiting in that room right over there. You'll find a camera all set up. Go in there and shoot him and hurry up about it." Wayne stood back while Gifford and Apperman resumed their altercation. Jenkins gave Wayne a queer look as he dug into Wayne's case for the exposed films. He hurried into the dark room and closed the door. Wayne was full of a numb chill. He turned away slowly. Sue had paused in her typing. Her fingers strayed over the keys as he bent over her. "Looks like it's all over but the formalities," he said soberly. "I hope your story's all set to hand in, because it's going to break right now. You've left yourself out of it, haven't you? Helping me, I mean. No use getting yourself in a jam, you know. I didn't mean to say it like that. It didn't work out." Sue said softly, "I'm sorry." Gifford turned from snarling at Apperman. "Lester, get busy. Get that shot of Orr." "Right away, Giff," Wayne said. He went toward the adjoining room that Gifford had pointed out. Glancing back, he saw that Sue was hurrying from her desk to Lamb's. Pausing outside the connecting door, he noticed first the view camera set on a tripod, with a light craning up beside it. Patrolman Orr was sitting on the opposite side of the room. Wayne fished out a cigarette and lit it as he went in. Partially covering his face with his hands, he felt a certain grim satisfaction in delaying Orr's identification of him as long as possible. Immediately, as Orr rose, he switched on the photo flood. The blinding glare caused Orr to blink and lower his head. "Stand right there between the windows," Wayne suggested. "It won't take a minute. Giff wants one of you with your gun in your hand. Okay?" he added wryly. "Sorry I kept you waiting." Orr squared his shoulders, hardened his face, and lifted his service revolver from its holster. "That isn't you, is it, Jenk?" he asked. "Doesn't sound like you. I can't see through that light." "I'm new here," Wayne answered, remaining in the shadow behind the camera. After focusing Orr's image on the ground glass, he drew the slide of the film holder and set the shutter. "My first night, and his last. I suppose you'd like to get your hands on that chap who got away from you." "Damn sorry I didn't drop him," Orr said grimly. "Wish I'd saved the state the trouble of stringing him up. Let's get this over with. Is this okay? It would be better if you'd step back a little and aim the gun straight at the lens," Wayne suggested. "Say," Orr said, complying. "Your voice seems sort of familiar." Wayne's thumb rested on the plunger of the shutter release. The glitter of Orr's gun was hard and bright and deadly. Orr's expression was confidently calm, yet merciless. He must have looked like that, Wayne thought, when he had fired at the fugitive dodging through the shadows on Sycamore Drive. A suitable caption for this picture would be, he reflected, "Patrolman who discovered the murder, taken by the accused while masquerading as a news cameraman." He was about to release the shutter when Sue Carey and Lamb appeared in the doorway. "Lester!" Lamb exclaimed. Sue had the two photographs which had been brought from headquarters by Jenkins. In one hand, Lamb was holding his magnifying glass, and on the palm of his other hand, a bullet was resting. Wayne sensed at once that it was the slug which Sue had extracted from his wound. She had gone back into their apartment as they were leaving to fish it out of the pan of water. "Lester," Lamb squeaked again, "they're the same. All three of these bullets came out of the same gun." Unconsciously, Wayne leaned into the shine of the brilliant light, his gaze turning slowly to Patrolman Orr. "Then this is the man who murdered my wife," he said. He jerked back at the instant Orr fired. The click of the shutter was lost in the roar of the report, the thought lightning through Wayne's mind that he had a picture of Orr attempting to kill him. He tripped over the tripod as a patch of plaster broke out of the wall behind him. The camera fell toward Orr. Suddenly Orr heaved it aside and ran out of the room. Wayne flung himself along at the patrolman's heels. Orr was pushing out the swinging doors when Wayne caught up. He grabbed his camera case by the trap. He swung it overhead and brought it crashing down to the back of Orr's neck. Orr plunged forward, parting the doors, and dropped inertly across the sill. Wayne turned about, suddenly aware that the city room was full of commotion. Reporters were springing up from their desks and running toward the fallen Orr. The door of the darkroom was open, and Jenkins was staring out, a dripping print in his hand. At the city desk, Gifford and Apperman had forgotten their quarrel and were staring at Wayne. Lamb trotted toward them, gesturing with both hands, chattering something that Wayne could not hear. Before he followed, he saw that Sue was rapidly gathering up the pages she had typed. "Orr is the man who killed my wife," Wayne said through a dry throat. "The bullets prove it. He was careless with his gun once too often. When he arrested Nolan 4 years ago, he knew Nolan must have hidden the stolen money somewhere close at hand. Evidently, he couldn't find it, but tonight he forced Nolan to tell him where the money was. He hurried out the back door of the house when I came in the front. He hid the money in the garage, then came around after me, and he's the one who—" Wayne paused with a tired gesture. "Sue has the rest of it. Stop the presses." The words howled over the telephone, but the voice was not Gifford's. Gifford was standing stock still, staring in speechless admiration at Wayne. It was the big Apperman who was shouting so loudly that there was no need of a wire to convey his orders into the basement. "Stop 'em, stop 'em," he bawled. "Stop those presses." End of Stop the Presses by Frederick C. Davis.